Congress's attempt to blow a gigantic hole in the Constitution started with the so-called discretionary exception of the FTCA. However, in the past, the Supreme Court had tried to keep the reins on federal law enforcement. This was the topic of an interesting back and forth between Justice Sotomayor and Mr. Liu.
Interesting, because in Garbert we said, if an official drove an automobile on a mission connected with his official duties and negligently collided with another car, the exception, discretionary exception, would not apply. That was because, and I'm quoting, although driving requires the constant exercise of discretion, the official's decision in exercising that discretion negligently, I'm putting in that word, can hardly be said to be grounded in regulatory policy. I mean, I don't see the difference between that and saying that an officer's action in using a GPS to break into the wrong house has any policy related to it. It's like driving negligently. You got to that house by mistake. You drove negligently and hit someone. So I don't understand how the act of going into a wrong house can be discretionary.
Interesting question. Does the fact that the federal agent is working within the discretion of their job give them protection from their negligent acts?
Well, we understand the discretion here to be the discretion as to how to identify the target of a search warrant.
Okay, the agent had the discretion on how to identify the target, or more specifically, the target's location. But don't they have a duty to make sure that they are at the correct location, especially consider they plan to and did use violence, using potentially lethal force during the conduct of the raid?
Well, he had it identified. He got the right target. He just had the wrong house. It's not a question of did he make a mistake in his warrant application about this individual being a drug dealer. All right, there I might agree with you. Okay, I'm talking about a wrong house raid. He has the right target, the right house, but breaks into the wrong one.
Right, and it's because, as the courts below found, of a reasonable mistake that the officer
that's
made.
The issue. Is that consistent with Garbert? And I'm asking you to explain to me how that formulation is consistent with Garbert.
When you or I make a mistake, we're liable for it. So why not federal law enforcement? The officers made a mistake. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. But who is responsible for the consequences of that mistake? If the purpose of the FTCA was for the United States to assume liability for the bad actions of their employees, why place such wide-ranging exceptions on that liability? That is, unless you are planning to deny people their right to petition the government for a redress of their grievances. This led to another interesting exchange, this time between Justice Gorsuch and Mr. Liu.
No policy says don't break down the wrong house, door of a house.
No, excuse me. Of course, it's
don't traumatize its occupants. Really?
Of course, it's the United States policy to execute the warrants at the right house.
I should hope so.
But stating the policy at that high level of generality doesn't foreclose or prescribe any particular course of action in how an officer goes about in identifying the right house.
So there's no rule about how federal officers identify the right house, but does that absolve them of the responsibility when they get it wrong? Mr. Liu's response was priceless, and not in a good way.
The officers here were weighing public safety considerations, efficiency considerations, operational security, the idea that they didn't want to delay the start of the execution of the warrants because they wanted to execute all the warrants simultaneously. Those are precisely the sorts of policy trade-offs that an officer makes in determining, well, should I take one more extra precaution to make sure I'm at the right house? Here, petitioners suggest, for example, that the officer should have checked the house number.
Public safety, operational safety, these were the concerns of the officers. Well, the public wasn't safe because they attacked an innocent family. Operational security was blown, too, because they were close enough to the correct house to alert the subject the FBI was after him. Tell me, how did the safety of an innocent family balance those policy trade-offs.
Yeah, you might
On the
look at the
mailbox?
address of the house before you knock down the door.
Yes, and as the district court found at 52A, that sort of decision is filled with policy trade-offs because checking
Really?
the house number at the end of the driveway means exposing the agents to potential lines of fire.
How about
from
making
windows.
sure you're on the right street? Is that?
And how does that?
I mean, just the right street.
No, I mean, I was just going
Checking the
to say,
street sign, is that asking too much?
what I would say is exactly what the courts below found, which is that the officers here made a reasonable mistake as to where they were. The allegation from petitioners' claims is that they should have done more. They should have stopped and got out of the caravan of vehicles and checked the streets.
Yes, the officers made a mistake, a big one. It wasn't reasonable. It was negligent. Officers didn't need to stop outside and exit their vehicles to check the address. All they had to do was drive by and look at the mailbox. Should the officers be forced to tell the family, including the traumatized child, that their safety wasn't worth making sure the GPS sent them to the right address? Even I double-check the address when I follow my GPS.